Our next topic is about the subsystems of the Earth. After watching this video, don't forget to take the quiz. And after watching this, or if you have questions, you can ask it during our clarificatory session in our upcoming synchronous session. In our checklist for this session, our goal is to identify the components and the importance of the Earth's subsystems. Now, what are the Earth's subsystems? As we know, the Earth is made up of different components. We can see mountains, volcanoes, oceans, rivers, the different gases, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and the living organisms. So we can categorize these components into four major parts or four major subsystems. These are the Geosphere, the Hydrosphere, the Atmosphere, and the Biosphere. Let us start with the Geosphere. The word geo means the ground or the land. Of course, we are standing above the ground right now, and the ground is made up of rocks and minerals. And also, the land has many forms, or we have different landforms. We can see mountains, volcanoes, hills, and other landforms. Also, deep below the ground, there are different layers. And you know this one before in your previous years. So we are here above the outermost layer, and the outermost layer of the geosphere is the crust. After the crust, deep below the crust is the mantle. After the mantle, we have this orange here. This one is the outer core. And then the deepest layer is the inner core. Inner core. So these are the four layers of the solid Earth. Now let's compare them in terms, first, obviously, the crust is the outermost portion, while the inner core is the innermost portion. In terms of temperature, obviously, it's actually the inner core. So it's the hottest layer, while the coldest layer among the four is the crust. So it's the coldest layer compared to the other layers. So the pattern here is that as we go down, again, as we go down, the temperature goes up. So obviously, the deepest layer will have the highest temperature, and again, that is the inner core. So the inner core have the hottest, highest temperature because it's the deepest. And then let's compare them in terms of their composition. So in terms of composition, of course, the crust is made up of solid rocks. The mantle is also mostly made up of rocks. Pero instead na solid, rocks in the mantle are mostly in liquid form or melted or molten form. So again, the rocks under the ground or deep below the ground is liquid or molten or melted because of increase in the temperature. So there's intense temperature under the ground and that melts the rock. The outer core and the inner core are mostly made up of iron and nickel. Iron and nickel. The same thing for the inner core, iron and nickel. So as you know here, so the mantle is liquid because of intense temperature. The outer core also is made up of liquid iron and nickel. So it's also melted iron and nickel. Again, that's because of the intense temperature. And then next, the inner core. The inner core is actually made up of solid iron and nickel. Again, it's the hottest layer, so we expect the inner core to be liquid because it must be molten because of the intense temperature. But why do you think the inner core is solid? Of course, it's solid, or the difference between solid and liquid is that their atoms are, for solid, the atoms are very close to each other, while for compared to liquid na there's some distance between the particles or the atoms. So again, the inner core is solid even though it has the highest temperature. Why do you think so? Okay, as we go down, aside from the temperature going up, we also have the increasing pressure. So as we go down, the pressure also increases. So obviously, the layer with the highest pressure would also be the inner core. So the inner core also have the highest pressure. And this pressure actually it compresses the particles of the inner core to be compacted and compressed to each other, and that's the reason why the inner core is solid, because of the intense pressure. So these are the four layers of the earth. We have the crust, the mantle, the outer core, and then the inner core. The crust is the outermost, the inner core is the innermost. The crust is made up of solid rocks. The mantle, liquid rocks, because of it's liquid because of high temperature. The outer core and the inner core is made up of iron and nickel. The outer core is liquid because of high temperature, and the inner core is actually solid. It's solid because of intense pressure. So the intense pressure compresses the particles to be close to each other, and that makes the inner core solid. The next part or subsystem is the atmosphere. The word atmo, the word atmo means air. So it means the air. So of course we have air around us, even though we cannot see them. Also, the atmosphere is also made up of different layers. The first layer is the troposphere. Troposphere. It's from the ground up to several kilometers above us. Now let's discuss the importance of the atmosphere. Obviously, the basic importance of the atmosphere is that we need the atmosphere for breathing. Of course, we need oxygen and other gases to survive. The next layer is actually the stratosphere. Okay, that's the next layer, stratosphere. In the stratosphere, we can see here a layer of ozone gases. An ozone gas is made up of three atoms of oxygen. And again, in the stratosphere, these ozone gases forms a layer. We call this layer as the ozone layer. And you have known before the importance of the ozone layer. The ozone layer protects us from ultraviolet rays from the sun, or the harmful rays from the sun. So that's another importance of the atmosphere. It protects us, protection from harmful UV rays from the sun. And again, that's because of the ozone layer, and the ozone layer can be found on the second layer, which is the stratosphere. The next layer is the mesosphere. Mesosphere. Here we can see the so-called falling stars. It's not actually stars, it's actually a meteor, and the meteor is a rock coming from the space. So on some cases, some space rock floating in the space can enter the Earth. And when they enter the Earth, they actually collide with the gases. So again, here we have for example, we have this space rock. So once they enter the Earth, they actually collide, magbangga sa air particles, and this causes friction. So mag-collide ang particles sa rock and then particles ng gases. So this creates heat, 'di ba? Pag merong friction, merong heat, and More friction means more heat, and more heat can, of course, burn. So it can actually burn this rock, and that produces the light coming from the meteor. And of course, during the burning process, this rock can actually break into smaller pieces. So in the mesosphere, or on this layer, rocks are burned and they break down into smaller pieces. So when they land on the earth, they are now smaller. So again, this is also another importance of the atmosphere. So the atmosphere protects us from space rocks. So they actually break down rocks for them to become smaller, so that when they impact or when they land on Earth, they are smaller. And of course, smaller size of space rocks means smaller damage. So that's good for us. So it's a protection. That's another importance. Protection from um, space rocks. And the next layer is actually the exosphere. The exosphere is the outermost layer of the atmosphere. It contains some gases. So these are the four layers of the atmosphere: the troposphere, the stratosphere, the mesosphere, and then the exosphere. Next, we have the hydrosphere. The hydrosphere, the word hydro means water. Of course, we can see water on the ocean, on the rivers, on lakes. And water can be in three forms. It can be liquid, like what we normally do. What we normally see. And water also can be solid in the form of ice or glaciers. Glaciers are also made up of water. And also, water can be in the form of gas, in the form of water vapor. So that's the hydrosphere. Of course, water is important for all living organisms. The last part is the biosphere. The word bio means life. So this includes all the living organisms, animals, plants, bacteria, and all other living organisms. So these are the four subsystems of the Earth. Again, the geosphere includes the ground or the land, the hydrosphere, water, atmosphere, the air around us, the different gases, and then the biosphere, all the living organisms.